Thomas Carter stood at the window of his corner office on the 42nd floor, watching the city lights twinkle below like scattered diamonds. At 35, he had everything: a 6-figure salary, a luxury apartment, a sleek black car that turned heads. His tailored suit cost more than most people earned in a month. His phone buzzed. Another message from his father, David. He swiped it away without reading it. It was probably another invitation to dinner, another attempt to reconnect. Thomas didn't have time for that anymore. He hadn't always been this way. 20 years ago, he was just a boy watching his father come home every evening, hands stained with engine oil, back bent from long hours at the auto repair shop. David Carter had worked those grueling shifts not because he loved fixing cars, but because he loved his son. "One day, Tommy," his father would say, ruffling his hair with those calloused hands, "you'll go to the best schools. You'll never have to work like I do." And David had kept that promise. He worked double shifts, skipped meals, drove a truck that barely ran, all so Thomas could attend college, then business school. Every sacrifice was made quietly, without complaint, without expecting anything in return. Now, Thomas barely called. Holidays came and went with brief, obligatory phone calls. His father's birthday last month had passed with just a text message. His secretary knocked. "Mr. Carter, your car is ready. The investors' dinner is in 30 minutes. Thomas grabbed his briefcase. Glancing one last time at his father's unread message, he had bigger things to worry about than nostalgia, or so he thought. The investors' dinner was perfect. Thomas closed a deal worth millions, and his colleagues raised their glasses to him. He smiled, accepted their praise, and felt the familiar rush of success wash over him. It was past midnight when he finally returned to his apartment. He loosened his tie, poured himself a drink, and collapsed onto his leather couch. For a moment, silence surrounded him, the kind of silence that felt more empty than peaceful. His phone rang. It was almost 1 a.m. Who would call at this hour? The screen showed an unknown number. Thomas almost declined, but something made him answer. "Is this Thomas Carter?" a woman's voice asked, professional but gentle. "Yes, who is this?" "This is Memorial Hospital. I'm calling about your father, David Carter. He was brought in earlier this evening. He's had a severe heart attack." The glass slipped from Thomas's hand, amber liquid spreading across the expensive rug. "What? Is he okay?" "He's stable now, but it was critical. You should come as soon as possible. He's been asking for you." Thomas's hands trembled as he grabbed his keys. The drive to the hospital felt endless, every red light an eternity. Memories flooded back. Memories he'd buried beneath spreadsheets and business deals. His father teaching him to ride a bike, running alongside him until his legs ached. His father at every school play, sitting in the front row with a proud smile. His father selling his only valuable possession, his father's watch, to pay for Thomas's college textbooks. When had he stopped seeing those sacrifices? When had success made him blind? The hospital doors slid open, and Thomas ran toward the information desk, his heart pounding with a fear he hadn't felt in years. Would he be too late? Room 304. Thomas stood outside the door, his hand frozen on the handle. He could hear the steady beep of monitors inside, a sound that made everything suddenly, terribly real. He pushed the door open slowly. David Carter lay in the hospital bed, looking smaller than Thomas remembered. His father had always seemed strong, unbreakable, those broad shoulders carrying the weight of their little family without ever buckling. Now, tubes ran from his arms, and his face was pale against the white pillow. But when David's eyes opened and found his son, they lit up with the same warmth Thomas remembered from childhood. "Tommy," David whispered, his voice weak but filled with relief. "You came." Thomas walked to the bedside, and for the first time in years, really looked at his father. When had his hair turned so gray? When had those lines deepened around his eyes? David was only 60, but hard work and sacrifice had aged him. "Dad, Thomas's voice broke. "I'm so sorry. I should have been here. I should have—" David raised a trembling hand, those same hands that had built Thomas's future, and placed it over his son's. "You're here now," David said softly. "That's what matters." A nurse came in to check vitals, and Thomas stepped back, watching the routine with a hollow feeling in his chest. The doctor arrived shortly after, explaining that David had been overworking himself, skipping medications to save money, ignoring warning signs for months. "Why didn't you tell me?" Thomas asked when they were alone again. "Why didn't you ask for help?" David smiled, that familiar, gentle smile that had always made everything seem okay. "You were busy building your life, son. I didn't want to be a burden." Those words hit Thomas harder than any business failure ever could. His father had never been a burden. He had been everything. Thomas spent the night in the hospital chair, refusing to leave. As dawn broke through the window, casting soft light across the room, he watched his father sleep. The steady rise and fall of David's chest was the most precious thing Thomas had seen in years. Around 7, a man in his 60s entered the room quietly. He wore a worn jacket and carried a brown paper bag. "Thomas?" the man said, recognizing him. "Is that you?" "It's me, Robert. I used to work with your dad at the shop." Thomas stood, shaking Robert's weathered hand. Robert's eyes were kind, but they held a sadness as they looked at David. "How is he?" Robert asked. "Stable. They say he'll recover, but it was close." Robert nodded, setting the bag on the side table. "Your dad's the best man I ever knew. When my wife got sick 5 years ago, your father gave me his savings, $15,000, so she could get treatment. Never asked for it back." Thomas felt his throat tighten. $15,000. He spent that much on a watch last year without thinking twice. "I never knew that," Thomas whispered. "Your dad never talked about the good he did," Robert said. "He just did it. Last month, when he had chest pains, he told me it was nothing. Said he didn't want to worry anyone, especially you. He was so proud of you, Thomas. Always showing me pictures of you in the newspaper, talking about your success." After Robert left, more visitors came. Mrs. Henderson from next door, who brought homemade soup. She told Thomas how David had fixed her car for free every month. Young Marcus, a teenager David had been mentoring, who cried as he talked about how David was the only father figure he'd ever had. Each story was a piece of a man Thomas had stopped seeing, a man who gave everything to everyone, expecting nothing in return, and his own son couldn't spare time for a phone call. David slept most of the day, and Thomas used the time to bring some of his father's things from home. The small house where he grew up felt frozen in time. The same worn couch, the same family photos on the wall, the same warmth he'd once known. In his father's bedroom, Thomas noticed an old wooden desk, its surface covered with bills and papers. He began organizing them, trying to help, when he found a drawer slightly open. Inside was a leather journal. Thomas knew he shouldn't read it. But his hands moved on their own, opening to a random page dated 3 years ago. "Tommy called today. Just for 5 minutes, but I'll take it." He sounded stressed. "I wish I could help him more. I know he thinks I don't understand his world, but I understand sacrifice. I see him becoming successful, and I'm so proud. But sometimes I miss my little boy, the one who used to wait by the window for me to come home, who thought I was the strongest man in the world. I hope I gave him enough. I hope he's happy." Tears blurred Thomas's vision. He turned more pages, each entry a window into his father's heart. "Tommy's birthday today. He didn't answer my call. Maybe he was busy. I left a message. I hope he knows I love him. Saw Tommy's name in the business section today. He's doing amazing things. I told everyone at the shop. I wish I could tell him to his face, but he's too busy for visits now. That's okay. He's building the life I dreamed for him. Heart's been acting up. Doctor says I should slow down, but the shop needs me and I need to work. Medical bills aren't cheap. I won't tell Tommy. He has enough on his plate." Thomas closed the journal, his hands shaking. His father had been suffering, struggling, and too proud, or too loving, to burden his successful son. How had Thomas become so blind? How had ambition stripped away his humanity? He returned to the hospital with the journal and sat beside his father's bed until David woke. "Dad," Thomas said, his voice thick with emotion, "I found your journal. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." David looked at the journal in Thomas's hands and gave a weak smile. "You weren't supposed to read that, son." "I'm glad I did," Thomas said, wiping his eyes. "Because I've been a terrible son, Dad. I got so caught up in my career, in proving myself, that I forgot the man who made it all possible. I forgot you. David reached for Thomas's hand. You didn't forget me. You were living the life I wanted for you. That was always the plan. But at what cost? Thomas's voice rose with emotion. You gave me everything. Your time, your money, your health, and I couldn't even give you an hour of my week. I was too busy, too important, too focused on the next deal. Meanwhile, you were here, struggling alone, proud of me while I ignored you. The machines beeped steadily as father and son sat in the weight of those words. Do you know what I realized tonight? Thomas continued. All those awards on my wall, all that success, none of it means anything. I have a beautiful apartment, but it's empty. I have money, but I've never felt poorer, because I lost the one thing that mattered, you. David squeezed his son's hand with what little strength he had. You haven't lost me, Tommy. I'm right here. But I almost did, Thomas said, tears flowing freely now. And if tonight had gone differently, I would have spent the rest of my life knowing I never said thank you. I never said I love you. I never told you that every good thing in my life exists because you sacrificed everything. You're saying it now, David whispered, his own eyes glistening. That's enough for me, but it wasn't enough for Thomas. He'd spent years taking his father for granted, and now he understood what he'd nearly lost. Success meant nothing without the people who helped you achieve it, and love couldn't wait until it was convenient. Over the next 2 weeks, Thomas didn't return to his office. He called his assistant, delegated his projects, and told his boss he was taking family leave. For the first time in a decade, work wasn't his priority. He spent every day at the hospital, then at his father's house once David was discharged. They really talked for hours. Thomas learned about his father's childhood, his dreams, his regrets. David told stories Thomas had never heard, about Thomas's mother who had passed when Thomas was young, about the struggles and the small victories that had filled their years. Thomas cooked meals, cleaned the house, and drove his father to follow up appointments. He met all the people his father had helped over the years, saw the community his father had quietly built through kindness. One afternoon, Thomas was going through his father's bills and found something disturbing. David was drowning in medical debt, had a second mortgage on the house, and was behind on numerous payments. Dad, Thomas said, sitting down beside him, why didn't you tell me about this? David looked embarrassed. I didn't want you to think I was asking for money. You worked hard for what you have. I worked hard, Thomas said, almost laughing through his emotion. Dad, you worked yourself nearly to death so I could have opportunities. Everything I have is because of you. That evening, Thomas paid off every single debt his father had. The medical bills, the mortgage, the credit cards, all of it. It barely made a dent in his savings, money he'd been hoarding for investments and luxury items he didn't need. You don't have to do this, David protested, but Thomas could see the relief in his eyes. Yes, I do, Thomas said firmly. You spent your life taking care of me. Now it's my turn. As they sat together that night, watching an old movie David loved, Thomas felt something he hadn't felt in years. Peace. Success wasn't about titles or bank accounts. It was about this, being there for the people who had always been there for you. 6 months later, Thomas stood in front of his company's board of directors. I'm resigning, he announced calmly. The room erupted in shocked protests, but Thomas raised his hand. I've spent 10 years building this career, and I'm proud of what we've accomplished together. But I've learned something important. Life is about more than quarterly reports and profit margins. It's about the people we love and the time we spend with them. He stepped down from his position and started something new, a nonprofit organization, helping low-income families with financial planning and education, the kind of support his father could have used years ago. Thomas moved back to his hometown, into a modest house just 5 minutes from his father's. They had dinner together 3 times a week. Thomas learned his father's old recipes, heard his stories, and finally became the son David had always deserved. On Father's Day, Thomas organized a small ceremony at the community center. He'd invited everyone David had helped over the years. Dozens of people whose lives were better because of one man's quiet generosity. My father built my future with his bare hands, Thomas said, standing at the podium with David seated in the front row. These hands that were stained with oil, calloused from work, worn from sacrifice. These hands gave me everything. And I almost let success make me forget that. David's eyes filled with tears as Thomas continued. True wealth isn't measured in money. It's measured in love, in sacrifice, in the legacy we leave in people's hearts. My father is the richest man I know, not because of what he has, but because of what he gave. After the ceremony, Thomas and David walked home together, the evening sun warm on their faces. Thank you for giving me a second chance, Dad, Thomas said. David smiled, putting his arm around his son's shoulders, those same shoulders he'd once carried on his back when Thomas was too tired to walk. You gave me what I always wanted, David replied. My son, back home. And in that moment, Thomas understood the greatest success of all. Remembering the hands that built your future, and using your hands to honor their sacrifice. The end.